more than one thing at a time. All right, if you didn't see that video, by all means go ahead and do that. That was in the homeworks that were listed there from last week. The next homework is homework number 5, part 1. I'll assign part 2 later. You'll find part 1 and part 2. Do part 1 now, which is to define and give original examples. So for example, I talked about a definition of bachelor, and so you're going to define what is a definition and then give an original example. So you'll define something else. The example I gave you was a bachelor. You should give a definition of something, and so on. So examples of, well, we'll go over a few examples right here. Okay, you should have your CALIT by now. You can expect a quiz. I've already assigned it for this week to have read chapters 1 and 2. Everybody got their CALIT? Hopefully you do. How many have your copy of CALIT and Huff already? So it looks like a lot of hands. You can expect a quiz on CALITs 1 and 2 coming up. All right, here's some results on the quiz from last time. So the first time, 2 had it correct. Why did Columbus want to go? How many people looked it up? So you wanted to check just to make sure. Nobody's volunteering. They looked it up. Look it up. You'll find it under Wikipedia or find other history sites, history of the world, other university courses have information online. There are a lot of places to look it up. History books, and you can read about Columbus. Why did he want to go to India? Because he knew you could buy spices there. Where did the spices come from? They came from the Moluccan Islands, Indonesia, from Ceylon, Sri Lanka, from some were grown in India. But if you got to India, they knew you could buy spice there. You could fill a ship up the size of one of Columbus's ships, like as big as this room is long, like fill it up with cloves and get it back to Europe. Why, you'd be as rich as the Koch brothers are here today. So you could make your fortune if you could afford to bring home a ship full of spice worth more than its weight in gold. Cloves. Those you have a bottle of cloves know it lasts a long time. Why did people like spices so much? Well, for one thing, because they were hard to get. What was the other reason? They did not have refrigerators. And meat has a tendency to smell bad after a while. You can make it smell and taste a lot better with these spices. And believe me, you don't want to live in a world that doesn't have refrigeration. It's made the world a lot different today than it was. They had salt. Europe had plenty of salt, so you could preserve meat with salt in those days. And salt was valuable because it was used heavily for preserving meats and other foods. And you could preserve with sugar. Sugar comes in later and also makes people very rich. So he wanted to go to be rich. That's why he said, if I'm successful, I want you to make me admiral. Give me the title of admiral. I want an income for the rest of my life. I want 10% of everything, of all the profits that are made by the spice trade. And they said, okay, it's a deal if you can do this. You can find a way to get there. At any rate, 2 had it correct in class. 48 got it right on titanium, and 6 were incorrect. Of course, people could see what was happening after they took the quiz. They could see the results. By the time we got to in class last time, it was up to 57, so we're having improvement. This is called education, right? We have evidence of learning. I like that. I don't like it when it doesn't change. If this number stays the same, I don't care for that. So we have a lot of examples of that will be happening in here during the class. Starts off, won't look as good as later on, so you'll be doing better hopefully as we go. All right. Is it logically possible for a human to live more than 500 years? And the answer is yes. There's nothing about the definition of human that means that you couldn't live for more than 500 years. Remember, we have 3 kinds of possibilities. We've got logically possible. We've got empirically possible. And we've got technically possible. Right now, it's not technically possible. How do we know? Well, we'll talk about induction in just a bit, because the argument is going to involve induction, which is a kind of arguing, reasoning, leading you to conclusions, from evidence to conclusions. How do we know it's not technically possible? Because we don't know anybody lived more than 120 years. Is it empirically possible? Well, we don't really know. Well, some people probably believe it's not. But suppose I told you, imagine someday they will come up with a chemical that if you take this every day, this chemical, your body won't age the way it does normally. And unless somebody murders you or you get a disease or something else happens to you, why, there's no natural reason you have to break down and die. That's a possibility. So it's not, you don't want to say it's logically impossible. It's just very implausible given what you know. And what you know is based on empirical evidence. So it's probably, it may be empirically impossible, but we don't really know for sure. And that's one of the things about, you know whether something is logically possible by the definitions of the words. And we know if something is technically possible because either you can or can't do it given the current state of technology. This definitely changes from time to time. Didn't used to be technically possible to be able to look into a crystal ball and see what was happening somewhere else. But people could imagine it, right? They wrote stories. You read 1001 Arabian Nights, Scheherazade tells the story of being able to look into a crystal ball and see what's happening somewhere else in the world. Can you do this today? Yeah, if you have a cell phone, you've got your FaceTime or Skype or something, you can see, you can talk to somebody else, not only hear them, but see them. You've got televisions, you can see what's happening somewhere else in the world. Look into the crystal ball and see something else. Didn't used to be technically possible. It used to be in the realm of fiction in 1001 Arabian Nights. But now it's technically, so that changes from time to time. We're not always sure what is, once you know something is technically possible, why you know it's empirically possible and logically possible. If it's technically possible, you know it's empirically possible. But we don't always know what's empirically possible. If it's not technically possible, it may, if it's logically impossible, now possibility goes this direction, impossibility, so if it's impossible, implication goes in this direction. So if it's logically impossible, you know it's not, it doesn't even make sense to talk about it being empirically possible or technically, but if it's empirically impossible, you're saying it'll never be technically possible. It's not now technically possible, and never will be. All right, so the answer to number one is yes. It's logically possible, although it may be empirically impossible, and it's certainly technically impossible. Is it logically possible for a bachelor to be married? And the answer is no. It's a contradiction, because the definition of bachelor was a member of the set of male and unmarried and never married, excuse me, male and never married and human. What type of statement is this? Whenever taxes are cut, the economy improves. This one is a posteriori, it's an empirical statement, and it's a posteriori false. We have some good counterexamples. In the 1920s, taxes were a huge tax cut, one of the biggest tax cuts in the history of the United States. What happened in 1929? We had a stock market crash and the worst depression of the United States. When else did we have a big tax cut? George W. Bush was elected. They cut taxes. They said it was going to create this miracle in the economy. What happened? We had the stock market go nowhere. We had the worst recession or depression since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Did we ever have a case when taxes were cut? We had Ronald Reagan. Under Reagan, they cut taxes and the national debt doubled. Some rich people got richer, but many people lost their homes. Unemployment skyrocketed. Other economic indicators got much worse. We changed the definition under Reagan of unemployment in order to make the unemployment figures look better a little bit. So they looked better after they changed the definition. They said, we're not going to count all the people that aren't working as unemployed anymore. So it's a posteriori false based on evidence. A rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. This is a definition. How many got that? 1? In this class, it's safe to raise your hand if you did it right. How many got that was a definition? Okay, not just an empirical statement or anything else. All bachelors are male. This is a logical statement that's a priori true. Now these are difficult for you. Do the homework. Homework part 5, number 5, part 1. Any questions about the quiz? Was there a question? I heard a sigh or something.
Wait, sorry, I just don't understand, for the false for A, what is that again? Sorry.
For A was an empirical statement that's a posteriori false.
Means after.
So it's a statement about the world,
Collecting data.
right? You observe people cut taxes, and you find out by observing that they cut taxes, and then you measure the economy. You need to define what you mean by the economy here. I guess we need to define what's meant by taxes. This is nearly tax season right now. What's happening in the news right now? We always have a lot of things going on in the world, but taxes are coming up, due in April, and what do we mean by the economy? You know, we have indices like the stock market and unemployment and things like that. And we have value judgments. When we say it improves, we mean more people are working, the stock market is going up. When the stock market goes down, people are losing their homes and people are out of work, we say the economy is doing worse. And so this is an empirical statement. Is it consistent with evidence? You have to collect evidence, and the evidence shows it's false. And empirical statements are statements whose truth is tested a posteriori. That means with respect to observations. So you cite examples and observations rather than a priori, which means you analyze the definitions of the words. And if the bachelor is defined as a member of the set human, male, and never married, we know that this is a priori true because we know that all bachelors are male, all bachelors are unmarried, all bachelors are never married, and we know that all bachelors are human. And that's from the definition of the word bachelor that I gave you last time.
Okay.
Right?
And-
Answer that question.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead,
I
follow
have a
up.
further question, sorry.
Right, it's fine.
So then on like a test or quiz or whatever, if we just put false, that would not be enough? Or, I don't.
Well, this question right here, your test is going to be multiple choice.
Oh, okay.
All right, so they may give answers with reasoning, and you should choose the right answer, and the right answer might include the right answer for the wrong reason, in which case that wouldn't be the best answer. So,
Okay.
and I could do, with multiple choice, I could ask different kind of questions. Yeah.
Okay.
On a typical question like this, would you have as the 5 alternatives a priori true, a priori
I
false?
might, yeah, it might very well, a question like
A
this, you know,
posteriori true.
multiple choice, it might be a priori true, a priori false, a posteriori true, a posteriori false.
Okay.
You know, it depends on something else, you know, it could be a lot of different things. Yeah.
Okay.
Or they could be, you know, there might be the right answer, but for the wrong reason, and so, you know,
Sure.
that's always an option that a person has.
I don't understand.
I could say I could say it's this example right here. I could say it's a posteriori false because by definition, the removing of taxes is an improvement to the economy.
You could say that in the question you're asking?
I could say that as one of the options in a multiple
So in the
choice.
answer, you're going to give reasons for whether it's opposite?
It could be, yeah. It could be a question that, you could have a question that has answers, which are yes and no, and you could say yes because for a wrong reasoning, or yes because of a right reasoning, or no because of a wrong reasoning, or no because of a right reasoning.
All
And
right.
you should choose the right answer for the right reason.
A lot of people are going to be misinformed on some of these issues.
On these.
The one you just brought up about taxes.
Well, that's true, that's why I put it on here. Some people have been misinformed,
So if
there
you're-
are people who are for their own motives. They will misinform you about things. For example, is smoking good for your health? People who sell cigarettes try to convince other people that it is good for you. They used to do this all the time. And then it became kind of politically incorrect to do so. And then they made laws against advertising cigarettes on television. All right? So nowadays you don't hear that anymore. But for a long time, there were scientists who said smoking is good for you. Who were these scientists? They worked for Reynolds. What is Reynolds? A tobacco corporation. What are those scientists doing today? They write articles that say there is no such thing as global warming. The same guy who was an expert on tobacco is not dangerous, and then he became a tobacco denier. He said, there's no evidence that tobacco smoking causes cancer. And then he gave up on that, and now he's been hired to work for Koch Industries. Now, my wife tells me, don't talk about politics in class. Koch Industries is a big oil company, all right? And they don't like the idea of saying that burning oil causes carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or that carbon dioxide causes global warming. But the same scientist who misinformed people about tobacco, he now works for them. And he's come out with a report saying there's no such thing as global warming. He's the only scientist I know of. There's like 10,000 scientists on the other side of the issue. Does the media properly inform you on these issues? No, the media says there's a big debate and we don't know. Some people say this, some people say that. If you look at politicians, it's about 50-50. Politicians, half of them believe in global warming, and the other half of them are taking money to be global warming climate deniers, they call them. All right, because they deny that the climate is changing. So they said it was cold today, so therefore there's no such thing as global warming. And the same guy used to work for the tobacco. So some people are misinformed about the dangers of tobacco and cutting taxes. And so it became a kind of religion for a while in the US to say that tax cuts were really good for the economy. A lot of money was spent. Who were the people spending the money? People who wanted their taxes cut. And did they get their taxes cut? Yes. And did they become richer as a result of the tax cuts? Yes. The top 1% of the U.S. gained a larger share of the total wealth in the United States. Right? The top 14 people in the United States gained as much wealth since the tax cuts as the United States spends on food stamps. But I'm not supposed to talk about politics, so I won't say any more about that. So yes, she is correct that sometimes people are misinformed, and I'll try to give you examples where you've been correctly informed in here, but often it's on the quizzes. People learn after taking the quiz and do better the next time. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about, this is we talked about different, I'll just quickly summarize for you. We talked about definitions. We talked about logical statements. We talked about empirical statements. And why do we need to talk about statements? Because explanations are made up of statements. When you want to explain something, so a scientific theory or an explanation consists of statements. And the statements come in these different types. You need to distinguish what kind of statements people are making. One of the things we want to know is we want to know what to know, what's correct. And we also want to know how we know. How do you know is an important. How is it that you know? We need to understand that. As Artemis Ward said, it ain't so much the things we don't know gets us in trouble as the things that we know that ain't so. That's a quote that's from Artemis Ward, and about 80 years later, Will Rogers repeated the same quote during the Great Depression in the United States. Some people misattribute that quote to him. People have a lot of misinformation, and one of the things in psychology is correcting the misinformation. People have misinformation about Columbus. People have misinformation about a lot of facts. Misinformation about taxes. They have misinformation about psychology, and we'll be trying to correct that. So these are statements, and there are different types of statements. And among these statements are empirical statements. These are statements that are statements about the world. And I want to talk about the definition of the meaning of empirical statements. And I'll use the word empirical meaning to refer to that. Definitions have no empirical import. They're not saying anything about the world. They're saying something about how we're going to use language. And logical statements don't add anything beyond what's in the definitions. But empirical statements are statements about the world. And when we talk about the empirical meaning, or the meaning of an empirical statement, there have been several positions. You could take a whole philosophy course on this. I'm going to cut quickly to how most scientists deal with this question. All right, I won't. I'll give you one little tidbit from philosophy of science. There's an older, stronger position known as verification. And this position held that if a statement could not be verified, that it was meaningless. And a statement that could be verified was meaningful. But the principle of verification is too strong. So this position is too strong because it leads you into concluding that nothing is really meaningful. And an argument against it was presented by the fallibilists. So, principle of verification was if a statement could be verified. That means shown to be true or false to verify the statement. So you're driving along in a car with a fallibist sitting there in the seat next to you. You're driving along and all of a sudden you hear bang and the car tips forward. It goes thump, thump, thump. You pull to a stop. The car sort of pulls over to one side and you say, got a flat tire. The fallibist says, how do you know? Says, well, the car went bang, thump, thump, thump. Probably got a flat tire. Says, yeah, but you could have hit a duck. Okay, I'll get out and look. Looks flat. Yep, flat tire. The fellow says, how do you know you're perceiving things correctly? Well, we'll call a cop over. They look at the tires. Look flat? Yep, flat. How do you know the cop's an expert on flat tires? Or we'll call a mechanic over. The mechanic looks at it. Yep, you got a flat tire there. We could be all hallucinating the existence of the cop and the other people. We don't know for sure. There are other people verifying that the tire is flat. So the fallibilists will say, you can't ever, their argument was if this is your definition of meaning, you can't ever resolve it. So there's a weaker form, or a weaker position, and it's operationism. And you notice we already, I introduced for you the idea of an operational definition. So among some definitions, some of them are called operational definitions. You've already read about operational definitions in Chapter 2, those that are caught up with the reading. If not, read up on operational definitions. The position, the philosophical position of operationism says that the empirical meaning, I'll just write meaning here, is equivalent to the set of the results of the operationally specifiable empirical tests of the statement. And if two statements have the same implied results of all their operationally specifiable tests, then the meaning is the same. So you might have two sentences with the same meaning. And if that set is the null set, in other words, if there are no implications, then we say it's empirically meaningless. All right, so if a statement has no tests, there's no way to check it, then we say it's meaningless. Two statements with the same implications. How about this statement? Water flows in one end of the pipe and out the other. Somebody else says, statement 2, water flows through the pipe. Are they the same? Same meaning? Well, no, because one of them said water goes in and water comes out, but doesn't say anything about what's in between. And the statement that water flows through the pipe is saying that there's water inside the pipe. So if you were to drill a hole and look inside, you'd see water inside. The other guy made no claim about that. So one of the statements said more than the other. Water flows through the pipe is saying more than water flows in and water flows out. Water flows in and out doesn't say there. Yeah, that person could still be right if there was no water in between. Okay? So two statements with the same implications have the same meaning. A statement that has no implication has no meaning. If I say to you, how do you test something, and somebody says there is no way to test it, then you're saying it doesn't have any empirical meaning. There's no empirical content. All right, so we're ready to have our first theory of psychology here. And this is a very important theory in the history of psychology. It's called the theory of unverifiable brownies. And the first property, well, we need a definition. The unverifiable brownies are logically unverifiable. It means they cannot be observed. Now, the first thing is, the principle is existence. And the idea of existence is that logically unverifiable brownies exist. The second premise is completeness, which is that everything that happens is a result of the actions of logically unverifiable brownies. So everything can be explained by what the brownies do. The third principle is inertia. So whatever a logically unverifiable brownie is doing, it continues to do unless it's acted on by another brownie. Fourth principle is action, reaction, or competition. Which is, for every action of a logically unverifiable brownie, there's an opposite reaction by another logically unverifiable brownie. Okay, so they compete to do things. Fifth principle is the principle of dominance. Whenever two logically unverifiable brownies compete, the dominant one always wins. There's a couple of others I'm going to skip here, but number 9 is the principle of fringes. And this one's important to us when we get to clinical psychology, because the principle of fringes says brownies have fringes, and the fringes can become frangulated, which produces illness, both medical illnesses and physical and psychological disorders. So frangulation, and you need to defrangulate brownie fringes will produce health. Now I'll put an asterisk on this one because not all psychologists agree about the fringes. We've got fringe deniers. They go to conferences. We're having meetings, giving talks about the theory of unverifiable brownies, and there are these people with signs saying there are no fringes. We just push them aside and go on in and give our papers at the conferences. Now, I don't want you to think about these, sometimes after this lecture, people leave me brownies on the desk here. You know, these are not the kind you eat. And they're not brown in color. People don't seem to know much about, you don't know about dwarves and elves because you've been watching these movies, you know, with Middle Earth and everything, right? And reading books, you know, The Hobbit and all that stuff. They're not doing such a great job with the Hobbit movies as they did with Lord of the Rings trilogy, incidentally, are they? So they did a lot better job. I think they did much better artistic realization of a series of books, you know, than the Hobbit series. So people know about dwarves and elves and things, but they don't seem to know much about the brownies. They know something about some other gnomes and leprechauns and others, but they don't